Bonjour.
Good afternoon. We'll be talking about consumption in times of major disorders. We have a panel of experts with us in Paris. And Anne Perrot, she represents the Cercle des économistes. Good afternoon. Then we have Philippe Guillaume, the CEO of Elior. Good afternoon. Then on. Mr. VALLÉE, the General Secretary of Carrefour. Alain from UFC-Que Choisir. And Guillaume CHARLIN, the head of BCG France. And remotely. So good afternoon to all of you. Christiane Lambert, president of FNSEA, the Organization of Farmers in France, and Lucie BASCH, Too Good To Go startup. She's the founder and CEO of Too Good To Go. I will give the floor to Anne. She will set the background. So when we talk about disorders, upheavals, we have in mind long-term problems, so climate issues, so mass tourism, deterioration of site quality. It can be an irreversible phenomenon. So we have the endocrine disruptors or any other issues connected with the environment with different causes, packaging and waste that have piled up due to endocrine disruptors. This has to do with wastage. This has to do with the way we consume and produce. And in the short term, you have the health crisis and the immediate impact that we've suffered over the past few months. So we had to reduce our consumption to the minimum. Health, food, intellectual works. But in the field of consumption, how do we manage the negative externalities? When I produce, have an impact on others. I create externalities. I create phenomena that will encroach upon their well-being. So what can we do? These are negative externalities. They have to do with the way we produce and consume. This has to do with density, have in mind urban sprawl, mass tourism, promiscuity, and all of these issues could undermine the way we consume. There's a macroeconomic problem. So households have been able to save during the lockdown, but the unemployment rate will skyrocket after the health crisis. So we don't know exactly what the future has in store. There are some short-term and long-term problems alike, and they will have an impact on consumption. But we don't know which kind of impact. In terms of externalities, we have in mind the role of the public authorities in order to rein in these externalities. There are some externalities that we know very well. Do we have to put a tax on pollution? I know that this is a controversial issue. Bear witness the failure of the ecological tax. Do we have to tax the polluting products? Do we have to tax products that are conducive to obesity? Are Western countries legitimate to impose frugal approaches to emerging companies? It's a bit paradoxical because they consumed quite a lot in the past. What does it mean to consume better? Does it mean to consume less? What about the current crisis? Does it accelerate some trends, people being eager to use organic farming or any breakthroughs in terms of consumptions? These are the topics that we will be addressing in this roundtable. I will give the floor to Guillaume. So Guillaume, Oh, there are lots of questions, lots of issues. So I'm not saying that I will be able to answer all the questions and address all the issues, but when you consider the crisis occurred when the world was changing, was transforming itself, digital transformations. So these transformations and changes occurred before the advent of COVID-19, but crises tend to accelerate the current trends. And this goes for the digital technologies. We've seen that e-commerce has skyrocketed, organic farming has made strides, service digitalization was increasingly used, and in the past we were reluctant about that, especially with telemedicine. So demand increased and brought about by the crisis, and supply hasn't really gone up. Companies tried to adapt themselves to that. So as part of the first step, there's a gap between demand and supply. First point. So we can anticipate consumer demand, and there are some breakthroughs. Tourism, aerospace, catering industry, restaurants, hospitality sector. These sectors, these industries were buffeted by the crisis. And it's something new, because the crisis would fast-track trends. There's a third point that is pivotal. We'll have to fight time and time again until we get a vaccine. Between 9 and 24, 36 months. It depends on whether you're optimistic or not. It will be a long period. Consumers will adjust their consumption patterns, their purchasing patterns. So it will be a long period. So we will be able to ponder over the ways of consuming and producing. But maybe these new ways of consuming and producing will become new standards. So when the trends accelerate, the situation easy. Companies will fast-track their digital transformation. The regulators will provide a framework, and they will adapt themselves to the investors. But when you deal with in-depth breakthroughs, it's very difficult to see and to anticipate what the future has in store. So we are in uncharted territory, yes. So I think that we will be able to see light at the end of the tunnel after a few months, after a few semesters. Laurent from Carrefour, allow me to echo what my colleague said about hypermarkets, supermarkets, or retailing. So in the months to come, we'll be facing a significant recession, and the recession has already started. So 12 million people being furloughed. The median income is 1,700 euros per person. Now, you have to think about the value that we bring in terms of goods and services. A lot of industries will be affected by the crisis. Second point, to echo what Guillaume pointed out, the growth in the digital technologies for our business. It was a major challenge. So we need to undertake this change. The crisis expedited the whole phenomenon. People were at home and they consumed differently. So vulnerable people and other people started to consume goods in a different way. Consumption patterns have been altered. And it means that we'll have to invest in skills, invest in people. So it's a third transformation that was already ongoing. Regarding externalities and societal environmental issues, at the start of the crisis, there was a sense of urgency. The law on circular economy, environmental questions, packaging issues. We thought that these issues will be or would be left in abeyance. I don't believe in that. It has nothing to do with the law, but these questions are intertwined with social expectations. It's very difficult, to understand the behaviors of consumers. You have to take into account the regulatory framework, European framework, French framework. There are also some industrial changes. Regarding the value chain, we'll have to move on. These changes imply time, investments, but there is no doubt that these trends will go unabated. There will be ups and downs, of course, but I think that many industries and sectors will have to be helped. Environmental questions, won't vanish into thin air. That's a piece of good news. Yeah, we need to take them into account. Whether you are in a crisis or not, you have a groundswell movement that you cannot stop. Christiane, we will give you the floor. Christiane, we will give you the floor. Hi, Christiane. So go ahead. Good afternoon to you. Thank you. Thank you for this invitation. I'm in the Maine-et-Loire department in a rural area, so it's not easy to get a good connection. Thank you for inviting me. It is pivotal to talk about production. Mr. VALLÉE talked about hypermarkets and supermarkets or mass retail. So we met Bruno Le Maire every day, and we took stock of the situation regarding the supply of goods. Retailers said that we should bring forward the closing time because there was no milk, no flour in the shelves, but on the whole there was no shortage. French people were able to feed themselves. The food chain held water from production to distribution. Some sectors were in a bad patch. So we had to use free shift systems in order to fill in a milk pack or flour pack because some consumers decided to rush on staple products, semolina, eggs, milk, cheese, pasta, grated cheese, and they didn't consume our products. So restaurants were closed, so people focused on mass retail. So mass retail business managed to get 70% of the research and development. So there was a lot of pressure upon stores for the farmers. People realized that what mattered was to eat, to be healthy. So it was very important for people to feed themselves. And at the start, we were criticized. Local producers, organic producers managed to take up the challenge. Regarding the way we consume, there's something that we need to pay attention to. So people decided to eat clean foods. So, in fact, people ate quite a lot of meat, but less sliced meat, or you had lots of plastic products, food products wrapped in plastic were consumed. So gloves, visors were made of plastic, and we've noticed that the use of plastic was back with a vengeance. What is a matter of concern is plastic and the way it is recycled. We have a food chain that is organized, beefed up, and we managed to handle the rush in orders plus 300%. For Carrefour, the situation was not easy at the start, and it was also complex for the industrialists. I mean, so French people, were not eating French fries, so they ended up with a surplus of potatoes. And for example, they didn't eat some specific meat, poultry, and all the rest of it. So French people decided to eat French products. They decided to turn to local producers. They had some time and they enjoyed shopping. And for local producers, the crisis was beneficial. So the local producers organized drive-in systems. So after the lockdown, some habits remained. There will be new developments, but the farming sector held water. The agri-food industry managed to hold. So in the past, the food sector was stigmatized. People ate lots of ready-made dishes. But at the same time, people in their households started to cook more. So the more the products are sophisticated, the less farming products matter. Of course, you need to consider the purchasing power of French people. So for the French producers, they want to get a good income from their products. And we have to take into account the environmental constraints. And it is also true that there will be some cheap prices for some specific products. So we need to dialogue. Lucie, can you hear us? Yes, I can hear you. So too good to go. Too good to go. So we want to combat food wastage and food waste. So how do we make sure that people commit to reducing wastage? So we have 870 million people suffering from food insecurity. We are talking about an ecological crisis, and food wastage represents 8% of CO2 emissions. So this has to do with the management of the food chain. And we know that with the food chain, there are lots of inept practices. With the crisis of COVID-19, the way we relate to food has changed with new developments. During the lockdown, French people revisited their food patterns, and they decided to ponder over the way they relate to food. What is important to us is the value of food. What is the economic, social value of food? So we conducted a survey with YouGov. So French people changed their consumption patterns. There were some products that were out of stocks. Flour and yeast couldn't be found in the shelves. People advocate organic products, and they want to waste less. So for us, the crisis was an unprecedented period and it's a matter to eat according to our needs and according to the climate challenges. So two trends, digital and ecological trends, and they've sped up. But price does matter for the consumers, and it will be even more the case in the future because we will be facing an economic crisis. We shouldn't undermine consumers. We need to think in advance what kind of solutions are we going to advocate underpinning digital, environmental issues. But we need to think about the purchasing power of people. So with Too Good To Go, we've noticed that we can combine the ecologic impact with the reduction in waste. It's a win-win contract for the users and for the manufacturers. So how can we revamp our established models in order to combine the rise in digital technologies and the environmental challenges? And we have to make sure that food is accessible to all. And there's another point that is pivotal.
Just a couple of words for our audience who may not know Food to Go. Can you explain to us how the app works? Yes, of course. Too Good To Go, we connect the local retailers with distributors as well, canteens, food cafeterias. We have Elior and Carrefour, who are partners, and they're sitting across the table from us, and citizens as well, the other users of the app who are going to go pick up at some point of time. The products would have been thrown away a few minutes before. So it's to connect the retailers and the consumers to reduce food waste and to propose a win-win solution. So we've saved over 7 million meals in France. We also work in 13 other countries in Europe. And the idea is to have very simple actions of everyday life that make a difference. And we save over 100,000 meals a day in 14 countries of Europe, and we want to develop that throughout the world and even scale up. Great. It's a beautiful project. So we're going to move now to Philippe. Philippe with Elior. The Elior group is 40,000 users in France. We're a leader in collective food. 10% of food that is consumed outside of the house. So 2.5% of that with our 1,400,000 meals served every day. So we are facing two forms of disorders due to the crisis today. And of course, sanitary and environmental disorders. For the first part, we have to be clear, closing down schools for us have deprived a lot of children from the only meal that they had access to that was a good meal, healthy meal. So that's why it's important that schools reopen in September. In any event, we can expect to see a rise of people in France who will be in a situation of food insecurity. So we have today a know-how and tools that would allow us, if public monies goes down that route, to help those vulnerable people and to feed them in a healthy way. About the sanitary disorders, we talk a lot about it, and the environmental disorder existed before and is going to continue existing. These are more like long-term trends. For the sanitary disorder, of course, we operate on the sector of food security. On that, we have the protocols COVID-19. That, of course, exaggerated the protocols that we have to follow. We see a very strong relationship between what they consume and their health. That's starting with the allergens, of course. And that's the reason why we are the first ones in our sector to introduce the Nutri-Score on our meals to give information on the nutrition content of the food we serve. And as of the going back to school in September, all the food served in schools will inform the children on the content of what they eat. On the environment subject, of course, these subjects already existed. I'm going to take the example of the vegetarian diet. It's 40% 30% of our offer in England, 35% in general. The carbon balance, we communicate on the carbon content of the food that we produce, the local sourcing, organic. 53% of what we serve in France is made with ingredients that are grown in France or raised in France. And with the closing down of borders, of course, during the lockdown, it was even more so the case. On some cases, we have some percentage that are even higher than that. If you take fresh fruit, it's 80%. Then you have, of course, the suppression of single-use plastic. Let's be clear on that. When you go from a salad bar and food that is packaged, you have to do with what you have. And as Laurent was saying, it's clear that the whole industry sector that has to be created to produce alternatives to the single-use plastic that is unfortunately too much used. And the fight against food waste, we say 15 to 20% of what people are using is wasted. So that's what we're trying to get to with initiatives such as Food to Go. We have 10 initiatives in the Greater Paris area, including the one of Carrefour, which show that we can reduce food waste and feed people who otherwise would not have been fed, and with food that is still absolutely fine to eat. So facing those disorders, we only had two solutions. One was to behave as a responsible actor and worthy of trust. So we have to inspire trust, and we have to give to the consumers the capacity to make a wise choice. We cannot impose to them to become vegetarian, but we want to give them the option. With Nutri-Score, we give people the choice in the food that they choose to eat. Alain, you have the floor. Yes. In this background of recovery, economic recovery, we can see that everybody's looking at the consumers. We say that they've saved 60 billion. So all the professionals are looking at this money and hoping that it gets spent again. So we are wondering if we go back down the route of consumption, because consumption, of course, is the first engine of the economy. So we understand why people are trying to charm these consumers. We know that tomorrow's economy will be what our consumption choices will make it to be. Either we consume this or that product, either we have an enlightened choice or not, if we have a good Nutri-Score product or not. This is going to impact the producer, because if he loses market shares, he's going to try to get a better score. So what I'm saying is obvious, but in this background, we have conducted a survey to see what consumption do consumers want tomorrow, and what measures have to be taken, and what leads are there to put together a major plan, consumption law. It's the first time that in the beginning of a mandate we don't have a consumption law, and that should be the case to do it. So we launched that on our site. We have several proposals over a consumption that is more frugal and more fair, with a number of measures. And I'm not going to go into the detail of that now, but we ask the consumers to vote online, so we can then take it to the authorities, to the government, to the parliament, where you have 60,000 votes, and we've just launched yesterday. So in this case of a more frugal consumption, we have several aspects of a more frugal consumption. In energy, it means less waste, extending the life cycle of industrial products, extending the guarantee. There's something that we put on the table as well that is not revolutionary, but we want to test it with the public. It's what we call the green price. It's well known. by economists, and it's in order to make sure that the price that the consumer pays reflects as much as possible the real cost in terms of environment. So we want the truth of prices and the truth of costs. And we're shocked to realize that the consumer, when he has to make a choice, it's the price. The first thing he has in his mind is the price. So if you look at industrial products, equipment, a fridge, for example, that is consume a lot of energy, but it's going to be very inexpensive, or another one that's going to be much more virtuous, but consume less, the consumer does not necessarily want to pay more and have a return on investment that is not that obvious. It's the same thing with food products. Every time you have a chance to buy an organic product or green energy, but the spending capacity and the spending power comes in the way of it. So if you want to grow a more responsible consumption behavior, the price has to reflect the real cost. So an apple that is going to be organic is artificially presented as expensive. And the ordinary product is presented as affordable. The consumer is going to pay the consequence of the mode of production of an apple that is going to require a lot of water, entrants, pesticides that you're going to find in the water catchment area. So the water is paying for all of that overall. And we want to basically, with this mechanism of green price, re-internalize in the cost all the externalities that we know. Environmental externalities, packaging, waste collection, sorting, the fact of using a lot of entrants, a lot of water, integrate it in the price, re-inject it in the price, which will, of course, increase the price, but at the same time, make sure that the more virtuous product has a bonus. So it will be allow us to bring the prices together, and the consumer will have a chance to change his behavior. So it has to be extremely transparent. It has to be done gradually, a double graduality in the sectors and the products. And of course, it shouldn't be another VAT that is going to go into the state's funds. It has to go back to the consumer. The malus and bonus has already produced its good effect on second-hand cars versus a more frugal brand new car. So it's part of all the proposals that we make and that we put on the table and that we test with the public in this context of economic recovery that we all want. I feel that if I hear you all talk, that we expect a lot from this consumer after the lockdown and in this new area that we're about to enter. But a question that I probably want you to vote on it. Do you really believe that it's going to be a consumer, a post-COVID and a post-lockdown consumer? Is it going to be that different from the consumption, the habits that we had before? Or do you think that the consumer is not going to be that much different? Laurent, sorry. If I was sure to detect the behavior of the consumer, Carrefour would be doing much better than it does today. It's a complicated question, whether it's before or after COVID. Just to rebound on what you said and what was said, I think that everybody can agree with the idea that informing better the consumer, at least bringing him all the information that he needs to make his choice in favor of a product versus another, and the exercise of directing its consumption or influencing its consumption towards something that is more or less virtuous, that is more difficult. Because what is important, it's not that this individual product is good, but that overall you have good, food diets. I am the first one to say that sometimes I don't necessarily eat healthy enough. I'm not a nutritionist, but I think it's not that easy. And the last point is sometimes there's a gap between what the consumer says he wants or claims he wants and his real behavior. In a different sector, there was a very traditional phenomenon that was Arte, which is the favorite TV channel of the French. It was the first one coming out of all the surveys, but in reality, it was a different one. It was a more popular one. So you think you know your consumer, and if you try to orientate his choice. Having said that, the fact of having a green price is not going to solve all the problems of the world. It's just that if you're looking at a price of two prices of a product that is conceived in conditions that have a strong impact on the environment, or the use is has a strong impact on the environment, and on the other side you have a product that is more virtuous, even if the consumer is aware of the necessity to buy a responsible, virtuous, etc., the price, of course, unless it's a very militant person, the price is going to be a major factor of decision. So it's very important to play on that. Beyond the information, if I have the right information, and I take again the example of a fridge that is going to be rated A by consuming very little electricity, and another one that's going to consume much more electricity is going to be rated C or 2, if the price difference is huge, it's the price difference that it matters. A price is always relative to something else. It's the gap between the product, the virtuous product, so to speak, and the one that is not. The gap has to be reduced. So the one that seems falsely cheaper to buy, it's a lie, because it's going to end up consuming more. So if you want to improve that, we have to play on the reality of the price, on the truth of the price, what it really reflects. And then we talked about trust, and trust is very important. And I am shocked to see we said that there's a sector that is not going well, and we don't know how it's going to pick up. It's tourism. I am shocked to see how the professionals deny the rights of the consumers, walk all over them, and the trips have been canceled, flights have been canceled. Consumers cannot get their money back. They have a right to be reimbursed. The European Commission has started some legal proceedings against the French state that takes measures that are anti-European and anti-consumer. We said that COVID is still around, that there may be a second wave. Do you think people are going to use their credit because we gave them a credit instead of giving them their money back? Do you think people will trust the same airlines or the same by booking something again in December or in February, thinking that maybe if there's a second wave, I won't see my money back? The professionals of the industry have really to wonder, because trust is going to be a key element of the behavior in all sectors. In the food sector, trust on the origin of the good, buying French, buying local. There's going to be a huge communication on buying French. What does that mean by French? It means that what is the regulation on made in France? Nobody knows about it. We see images such as Eiffel Towers, Bastille Day, and when we realize that. And it's not just about the food sector. I saw recently a watch that is French made, and if you look at it more closely, the mechanism that is the most costly is produced abroad. The band is manufactured abroad as well. It's only the assembly that is produced in France. It's 1 minute and 20, and we say it's French made. So if we keep fooling the consumers that way, there's an appetite for buying French, for buying local, but people should not be fooled about it. So trust it plays a very important factor.
As Laurent said, it is very difficult to cast a future-oriented eye. So it depends on the vaccine. When a vaccine comes in 8, 12, or 24 months, we need to adapt supply and demand. And all the sectors, all the businesses will have to move, whether they are farming or industrial sectors. I think that demand will be volatile. It will depend on the health situation. So without any vaccine, we'll have to use the social distancing measures. The virus is still there. Bear witness what is happening in Brazil, the US, and India. So demand will be volatile. The second time horizon has to do with the post-vaccine era. There are some trends that have sped up. E-commerce, organic farming. So we have an insight into where we're heading for. But what about the breakthroughs? There are some breakthroughs, and we don't exactly where we're heading for. So companies will have to be equipped in order to thwart this volatility period. So people should be equipped with digital technologies, but it's a matter of being agile in the 12 or 24 months to come. And of course, we need to adapt ourselves to this new standard, this new normal that we cannot yet outline. We've been talking about consumers. Consumers are in an ecosystem. They react to an offer, to a piece of information, but we have to talk about the investors and the expectations of investors. Investors started to change tack. And the past 3 or 4 months, the most virtuous companies, environmentally speaking, they are more virtuous, and there are some companies that attracted more funds than others. You have to consider the potential behavior of consumers. What is important is to have a fair competition. And what about the employees? And the employees should be given some transparency. Consumers should be given some transparency. And you shouldn't ask too much from consumers. You have a whole ecosystem that should be well managed. You have the regulators, you have the employees, you have the politicians who play a key role in this ecosystem. Back to a point that was highlighted by Anne Mazot. If we want consumers to consume in a virtuous way, you need to embed in the price the cost of externalities. And this is a throwback into the failure of environmental taxes, because people are not on an equal footing. And it's not simply a matter of consumption. We need to revamp the tax regime. It should be offset by lump sum-based transfers. You're not going to pass on the increase in taxes, to people who are less well off. So let's say that I will get 300 euros a year on a lump sum basis. So whatever I do, I will get 300 euros, but I can choose to drive. I can also ride my bike, and if I drive, I will pay more because there will be a tax on fuel, whatever kind of fuel. And this is a kind of approach that we could roll out, of course, but we need to think about the transfers that have to do with these policies. If we don't do that, people will be hostile to policies that are not fair. The carbon tax was a failure. At UFC-Que Choisir, we were hostile to the carbon tax. It was a tax on rural areas, on peri-urban areas, because people had to drive to use their car, because the transportation system was not adequate. And we wanted to use the green a voucher. Of course, this project petered out. But we thought about that. We thought that it was a punitive regime, a punitive tax regime, and we need to avoid this hurdle. Christiane, go ahead. Can I speak? Can I speak, please? Yes, go ahead. Thanks a lot. Mr. Bazot's comments make me react. So you have import products and the price is twisted. We import lots of food products and they are produced in conditions that are different to those in France, and the production costs are very low. And the French producers, cannot take up the challenge, and that's why some farms have gone bankrupt. In the field of fruit and vegetables, we lost quite a lot. The imports of fruit and vegetable have increased by 67% and 50% over the past 2 years, because you can buy these products in a supermarket. So it means that some French farmers have gone bankrupt. So we decided to draft a manifesto for a food sovereignty, sovereign practices. So we need to focus on the environment. We need to emphasize health. If farmers want to produce in a healthy way, consumers should follow suit. Taxes should be less, and we need to get more competitive productions. Franck Ribou said, I don't know what a consumer is. I know what a customer is, what a client is. A customer will accept a price or not. So if you consider French products, the health and environmental content is better. That's why the prices are more expensive. If there is no business activity in the farming industry, there won't be any jobs. We will move into a period characterized by unemployment. So we need to maintain employment, whatever the sector, automotive industry, farming industry. So you can't have a premium price and buy a low cost at the same time. Otherwise, you will undermine all the value chain, all the supply chains. So retailers, they've made some efforts during the lockdown. So they advocate French products. I thank them, but it should be on the long haul. So there should be a pact between the producers, consumers, clients. It won't be an easy task. We have lots of expectations for the future regarding societal challenges and environmental challenges, but the economic crisis will bite us hard. So this might undermine our goodwill. Philippe, go ahead. So rice, pasta, grated cheese were eaten, and I can tell you that on average French people put on weight 2.8 kilograms. So people should get access to healthy food, even though their purchasing power is not high. And this is something that we need to reconcile. Otherwise, the economic crisis would compound inequalities, and the gap between the haves and have-nots. People who can buy local products, organic products, and those who can't buy those products. And I think we have a school pass worth 3.5 euros. And there should be some proteins in the meals. So we need to comply with these specifications. It's important to look for some solutions, and we need to advocate local production, but we need to communicate on the choices that we make. Price is one thing, but we need to tell the whole story of a product. And we have to make sure that people desire the products. When the purchasing power is reduced, people should consume less, but they should consume better. This is what is at stake. The economy is growth-driven. So what does it mean, consuming less? Are we going to harm ourselves if we buy less? So these are complex challenges to take up. Let's have a look at some questions put by our listeners. So, a question by Ennis. How can we move on to a production mode that will create jobs? Christiane, so buy products that are made in France, cars, clothes. When you buy French products, it's better. Have a look at the success of the French boxes. This is the textile industry. The socks, the French socks, pair of jeans being made in Lozère. We have to say that there are some French industries that have lost because you had some T-shirts worth 1.5 euros or some trainers that were worth 3.5 euros, and we've nipped in the bud the French industry. So it's important to produce in France and to buy in France and to buy French products. I'm not going to revisit what I've said. So we tell people to buy French products, but we don't have any standards about French products. What is a French product and what is not in French product? You will put the French flag on a product, but the economic share that is French is quite low. So you cannot take French consumers for a ride, in fact. So you cannot mislead them. So buying French has nothing to do with frugality. Being sober, being frugal means buying sustainable products instead of buying on a regular basis products that can't be repaired, that can be disposed of. Products should be kept over time, and people will be able to consume differently. Or so I pay more for a shirt, but I want to be able to buy 3 shirts. I don't have several shirts, but only one shirt. It's a matter of balance, in fact. I change my trips. Energy expenses will diminish. It's more frugal. It's sober because I invest in domestic appliances that are not energy intensive. I will insulate, for example, my home. Energy renovation is key. It's important to give some tax incentives, public tax incentives. I mean, it should be given for energy efficiency. According to ADEME, building renovation, housing renovation, this is very easy. You can insulate doors and windows, but lots of people have said that it's not efficient. And you have some people who can make lots of money. So people will change your roof, will change your boiler, will change your hot water tank. But of course, it's a waste of money because energy performance is not at the forefront of the system, and there is no obligation to deliver. There's a lack of confidence. We've made lots of promises about return on investments. So investments being made in order to renovate homes. In France, you have some companies, and they calculate, they compute return on investment. Consumers are asked to invest in renovation with costs, with some incentives, with some subsidies, and they are promised that the energy bill will dwindle. We don't know if the work will be efficient. There's no one who will guarantee the efficiency of work. Ségolène Royal voted an act, and the best support obligation has been removed, and people are promised a return on investment that is fake. So renovation of building hasn't taken off for these reasons. Being frugal in terms of consumption, it's important. It's important to get some information, and the consumers should get some vested rights. The promises should be kept. The state should invest commensurate with the energy gain that is not made. For example, I will have a double glazing, but it has no impact on energy consumption. Isn't it wishful thinking? You are a committed consumer. During the crisis, I mean, people rushed to fast foods, and once the lockdown was over, people decided to rush to supermarkets. And they decided to scoop everything. So the consumer reacts to an offer, to an ecosystem. So we've observed these trends. A consumer is a citizen, a bit schizophrenic. Of course, we need to guide them. You can't expect, a consumer, to find his way through among a jungle of products. Yes, go ahead. Of course, it's just a fledgling process. So there are lots of behaviors that are not going in the right direction. So when you have a crisis, trends speed up. So it's important to address these questions. We've been talking about ecology. We've seen the success of the green parties during the elections, and the Citizens' Convention on Climate has gained ground. So we are heading in this direction. But you have politicians, companies, citizens should think about new habits and taxes. So what is the direction that we need to take? So it's an ecosystem. It's a small bubble, but this small bubble should grow up, and everybody should be in a position to head in that direction. We have a genuine opportunity. We need to overhaul our habits. So if you rely on people who don't want to change, we won't change. But we should focus on people who are ready to change things. Philippe, are you cynical or optimistic? I want to be realistic, but I'm sanguine as well. You cannot expect consumers to behave in a certain way. So I have to find a solution with my teams when we offer a food pack worth 3.5 euros. So there are some dietitians helping me, and we have some solutions, but we need to sell products, valuable products. So we need to educate people. So there's a link between what children eat and the future. This is something that we teach them. And I think that we need to tap the environment, the current environment, bear witness the Green Party's success, but we shouldn't use that as a commercial opportunity. We need to create the conditions for trust and confidence. We should be trusted third parties. We are not going to surf on a wave for the sake of it. And we need to start in the company with the employees. Employees should believe in what they do. They should believe in their work. If employees think that what we do is window dressing, it won't work. For me, I have a concern. The 45,000 employees, should work with passion, despite all the challenges that we have. There will be lots of challenges. We talked about volatility. Some restaurants were producing 100 meals. One day they will produce a dozen of them, and the next day 50 meals. So there are some operational problems, but we have to find solutions because I have to feed people. So there are some people who rushed using e-commerce. The first experience of e-commerce was not positive because there were too many people, or they had to wait for 2 weeks before a delivery. So we are going through a period of volatility. Can we offer new services? Does it work or not?
I think it's linked that we can ask the consumer for everything, but I think that the evolution of these last few years is that the consumer expects a lot from the people who provide a service or a product to him, because the digital economy and the acceleration of certain consumption modes and the information that is now the unlimited information that he has access to all the time gives him a capacity of choice that he didn't have 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So he has a power that is increased and that he uses more or less well. And he expects certainly a quality of service, a quality of products. So I tend to believe that he's asking for everything. He has less and less the will to make the choice. No, he thinks that it's our job. I'm going to put it plainly. He's not there to wait and maybe you should pick that or this. No, if I buy a product, I want it to be all at once, because he is used to have access to a product that encompasses all the qualities that he's asking for. And I think that's the difficulty of our job. I don't think that we're in a period where the consumer has a lot of decision choice power. He's facing a lot of paradoxes. Look at the food sector, for example. You see a breakthrough with Nutri-Score, but we fought hard to put it in place. We fought the battle. We won the battle. But look at the Nutri-Score. And on the side, look at the advertising campaigns of the agro sector for products for kids. These are the less healthy products, as if we didn't have anything better in store to give the kids. So there's a constant demand to parents that the kids request them to buy such and such product that are promoted by the food sector. So don't tell me that the consumer, particularly on the more modest categories, have the capacity to resist and make the right choice. And that's the difficulty. We made a survey on the cupboards of households, what's in the pantry, and the products that are the most promoted by the industry. And they are the most unbalanced. You were talking about a framework. In some European countries, should we tell the industry, the food industry, dear friends, do your advertising campaigns as much as you want, but not for these particular products, because we know they have an impact on obesity. There's a challenge of public health. Don't promote them with kids. Promote something else. That would be a good framework, because it's good to say that the consumer is responsible, but between the sanitary information and the promotion, the ads that we have everywhere on TV, etc., it's completely unbalanced. It's not only for food. I just want to say that the trend is started. That's all we want to say. This is not going to stop, but let's not imagine that in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, everything is going to be solved. If you look at internet, for example, to make a comparison, it took 20 years. We thought it's going to change the world, but it still took 20 years to change the world. It's a long path. It's a long journey. But we have started. I'm going to give the floor to Anne to have closing words. Very hard to sum up everything that was said. What was talked about a lot here is how can we bring consumers who act short-term it's a short-term action that they make when they consume to take into account long-term concerns of whether they affect climate, health. These are long-term concerns. So what came back a few times is to integrate long-term concerns in short-term decision is trust. Trust in the quality of the products they buy, trust in the fact that long-term effects are integrated in the products that we're buying now. Thank you all. Thank you to all of you.